Welcome to episode 59 of the Animorphs Read Along broadcast. Today we are talking about book 51, The Absolute. This is the last Marco book. It features some of the final lighthearted hijinks of the series. Not that this book wasn't action-packed, it was totally action-packed and super long and totally insane. There was something about the tone of this book that felt normal. You know, this was a big, crazy adventure full of bad driving and Marco in a dress compared with sort of the brutal depressingness of last book. And if I remember correctly, the final 3 books, this was a nice fun break. Marco's obviously had no shortage of serious storylines, but he is often a tool for comedic relief, so it felt really fitting that this book was so filled with ridiculousness. I mean, we open with Marco and Tobias stealing a tank. What? We get the first 7 chapters with the whole tank thing, and then really the second half of the book with Marco, Axe, and Tobias on the run with the governor. But in between those 2 things, a lot of great stuff happens. We have Marco talking a little bit about how guilty he feels. He has everything he's ever wanted, his family's back together, and he says, "For the Animorphs and for the war we were fighting, my mother's escape was the beginning of a long, terrifying downhill slide, and we were about to hit rock bottom. Hard." Even though the tone of this book does feel like a normal Animorph book, the content is not at all. I mean, the Yeerks are mobilizing, they are attempting to take over the National Guard. This is basically the book where they're going public. They're like, get to the governor, tell her what's up, let's do this. Having what Marco refers to as a war council. He addresses the change in Jake. He says, the loss of his family turned Jake into someone none of us knew anymore. I also finally got my awesome Ava scenes with her being involved in these discussions. It made me so happy. I love her. And we see some of the fallout from the last book, and Jake is dividing the team into 2 groups. Cassie's like, oh, I'll go with the governor. And he's like, no, I'll send Axe, Marco, and Tobias because I trust them. Oh my gosh, Jake. I also loved that Marco and Tobias drove the tank into Chapman's house, and they finally remembered that Melissa Chapman is a character who exists, because Rachel was like, you destroyed Melissa's house? And I was like, thank you for caring. This book actually looks backward a few times, like referencing book 2 with Melissa and her cat, and then also referencing book 16 when they flew and Jake almost got killed in Flymorph. I liked it. These books do kind of have some plot holes and loose ends and forgotten threads. I do love these kinds of moments when they really reinforce continuity and remind you that those books 50 books ago, they happened and we still remember them. But other than the War Council, which was probably my favorite part, but we really don't dwell too much on Jake's crumbling emotional stability or the tension between Jake and Cassie or even the tensions going on within camp. I think the fact that we kind of are away from all of that helps this book to stay so fun. I was like surprisingly into the duck morph. I like that they were like, we should have been using these guys all along. They're excellent. Once again, this very comical scene of them trying to acquire the duck and it being way more challenging than they thought. Just very reminiscent of earlier, simpler times. Like now that I'm at the end of the series, when everything like awesome is happening, I'm like, I remember those middle books when they didn't do anything and everything was just fun. Good times. So like, I just need to talk about this paragraph and how pleasant it is. We left the mountains behind and flew over fields and rivers, highways and small towns. We took a mid-morning pit stop on a marshy farm pond. Then the flock headed back to the sky. We flew high to take advantage of a nice tailwind and reached the outskirts of the city just before noon. Forget dolphins or tigers, I want to be a duck. So the bulk of the story is Tobias, Marco, and Axe going to tell the governor so that the governor can prevent the Yeerks from taking over the National Guard. So they finally find the governor's house, and then they also finally, after much ado, figure out that the governor is a woman. And this happens. I stared at her. It didn't even occur to me that the governor could be a woman. I won't tell Rachel if you won't, said Tobias. Love it. So the governor is the coolest woman ever, and as they're kidnapping her, she's kind of like, okay, I'm down with this. Aliens, got it. Let's figure this out. They're in a car, and Tobias is driving for once and doing apparently an even worse job than Marco normally does. Then they like jump off a bridge onto a yacht, and they like shoot down a helicopter, and she is able to get the word out, and this book ends with the governor making an announcement on television and being like, hey guys, the Yeerks are here. I'm still kind of wondering what happened to all those people on the aircraft carrier from a few books ago. So yeah, I loved this book. I really did. And like I said, I feel like this book is sort of like our last day in the sun with the Animorphs before we plunge into the hurricane of despair. And it was lovely. It would have been nice to have that kind of moment with all 6 of the Animorphs, but it would not have been realistic considering the current mental state of Jake and Cassie, and even maybe to a certain extent Rachel. I enjoyed spinning this book with our little trio of bros. Also, can we talk about the beginning? Show off, I said. Hey, I'm a hawk. He pulled out of the roll. I only get so many hobbies, and perfecting my red tail spiral of death happens to be my favorite. Tobias being happy just is one of my favorite things. And also, like, Tobias and Marco being friends is one of my favorite things. Like, in book 3, this is a quote, Marco and I will probably never be very close. And look at them now. But yeah, those are all my thoughts about Animorphs number 51, The Absolute. The next book is book number 52, The Sacrifice. And I don't remember the details of it, but the title is making me very nervous.